Connection issue. Do you want to share your screen?
I think I'm right. Okay, I think we are finally live. Sorry about the delay there, people. A few technical issues, but we'll get started now. First of all, hello. Thank you so much for tuning in to this kitchen session and for hanging around as well. My name is Jamie Highton, and I'm an associate professor in applied sport and exercise physiology here at the University of Chester in the Department of Sport and Exercise Sciences. And the kitchen session that I'm going to do, the short talk that I'm going to do, is going to be on the physiology behind breaking the marathon world record. And there are three things that I want to try and get across from the talk. The first one is just to give you a really into what physiology and what exercise physiology is. And I think that would be useful because if you are going on to maybe study a sports science degree, that's going to be a big part of that degree. You're going to study physiology. So I'll give you a brief definition of what that is and the kind of things that we do as exercise physiologists. And then I'm going to talk about the marathon and just how remarkable it is to break a world record in the marathon. So it's really remarkable to break a world record. It is truly remarkable to break a world record in the marathon. So I'm going to go through how some athletes are able to do that. And I'm going to go through it by talking about their physiology. What are some of the physiological things that athletes do or have in order to be able to perform these remarkable feats? Now, I should say that if you've got any questions for me throughout, then please ask your questions as I'm going through, type them in, and I'll do my best to answer those questions at the end of the talk today. So I won't answer them as I'm going through, I'll answer them at the end, but please do keep your questions coming. Okay then, so on to the talk. I said that the first thing I was going to talk about is what physiology actually is. So if you looked it up online, or you looked it up in the dictionary, you would see that physiology is basically the study of living organisms. Now that could be plants, and that could be animals. But if you're an exercise physiologist, and in the domain of an exercise physiologist, you're going to be interested in the human body, human physiology, and how the human body works, ostensibly. Now, it's tempting to think that we know everything about the human body and how it works, but that couldn't be further from the truth. There's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot that's very curious about the body. I'll take an example from Bill Bryson's book on the body, where he notes that we are predominantly made up of oxygen in terms of chemical elements. So the vast majority of us, or certainly the largest proportion, is oxygen, which on the face of it doesn't seem too unusual until you kind of think that oxygen's an odorless gas. We're predominantly made up of an odorless gas that is highly flammable and corrosive for that matter. And the human body is full of these curiosities. Now, as a physiologist, I need to kind of understand and be able to measure in the lab certain things like individual molecules, like oxygen, or proteins, or glucose, or fats, but also these molecules and how they come together to form cells and tissues and organs, and ultimately organ systems that function and integrate together in order to keep us alive, in order to keep us well and functioning properly. Now, if you're an exercise physiologist, you're interested in how the human body responds to the acute and chronic stress of exercise. And exercise is a stress. Stress is the right word here, because our bodies like to be in this fairly narrow range and in balance. So if I take, for example, your body temperature or your core body temperature, as I sit here now, and as you sit here hopefully listening to me, your core body temperature is only a few degrees Celsius away from being fatally high or fatally low. And yet we can exist in temperatures, environmental temperatures that fluctuate quite a lot. And we can exercise where that will raise our body temperature. And yet we stay well and we survive. So a physiologist is interested in studying how that occurs, how we respond to that acute and chronic stress of exercise. And you can go away then and be a physiologist, and work with athletes because you understand the physiology that maybe makes them better. Or you could work with the general population and try and improve their well-being and health because the physiology is really important for that. So that's what a physiologist does, and that's what physiology is. Next up, we've got the marathon. Now, some of you who are listening may well have run a marathon before, and so we'll be painstakingly aware of just how difficult it is to complete a marathon, never mind break a world record. So for those of you who maybe aren't so familiar, a marathon is run over 42.2 kilometers or 26.2 miles. I thought I've got to use some props from the kitchen. So the energy expended by an elite level runner is going to be about 2,000 calories or more, or 2,000 calories plus, which is about the amount of energy in this jar of sugar here. And that, you know, to me looks like quite a lot of energy there. 2,000 calories is the amount of calories that certain people will be required to eat per day. And yet that's expended in a single marathon, or more than that. Now, I'll be using that jar of sugar again later. Now, the world records, I said they're remarkable. They are remarkable. So the female world record is held by Bridget Kosgei, and the time of that world record is 2 hours, 14 minutes and 4 seconds. In the case of the male marathon, the record holder is Eliud Kipchoge, and he ran the marathon in 2 hours, 1 minute and 39 seconds. Now, he did do a sub 2 hour marathon, but that was not in a recognized race for which a world record would stand. So 2 hours, 1 minute, 39 seconds was his marathon world record. Now, again, if you've ever run a marathon, you will know just how ridiculous those times are. They are outstanding, almost superhuman. But if you've never run a marathon, it might not seem that impressive. So I've got some stats to hopefully show just how impressive that is to be able to run it that quickly. So if we take Eliud Kipchoge's marathon world record, for example, and if you look at the time it took to do 5 kilometers in that race on average, so we get his 5K split times. And remember, he did this 8 and a bit times back to back. He completed 5 kilometers on average in 14 minutes and 24 seconds. If you've ever done a park run, which is 5 kilometers, you'll know that for the most part, if you get under 18 minutes, you're probably going to win. You're probably going to win that park run. And certainly if you're around 20 minutes, you're towards the top. The world record for a marathon, sorry, for a 5 kilometers is 12 minutes and 37 seconds. Okay, so he's not too far away from that kind of pace either 14 minutes, 24 seconds for 5 kilometers. Another stat is that he completed his 100-meter splits on average in just over 17 seconds, so 17.2 seconds. Now, that's not going to win a gold medal in 100 meters by any stretch, but when you consider that he did that 420 times back to back, it's pretty remarkable. I think one of the most impressive statistics from the race is his split for the half marathon, or the second half of the marathon. So he completed the second half of the marathon in 60 minutes and 33 seconds. So 1 hour and 33 seconds. And at the time of him doing that, of him breaking the world record, only 3 Americans ever had run a faster half marathon on its own. And yet Eliud Kipchoge had already done a half marathon and was able to run his second half of the marathon in 1 hour and 33 seconds, which is just incredible. If you're interested, his average speed in the race was 20.8 kilometers per hour, 20.81 kilometers per hour, about 12.9 miles per hour. I hesitate to say try that on a treadmill because it probably wouldn't be safe. So when we do these kind of things in the lab, we have the athletes actually strapped to a harness so they don't get flung off the back. But if you want to run outside, and you might be running outside plenty at the moment, just see if you can run at 20.8 kilometers per hour for any reasonable amount of time. And I dare say for most of you, it'll be a struggle to last for maybe more than 2 minutes. So these world record performances are incredible. The speed that they maintain over the course of the race is absolutely phenomenal. So what's some of the physiology behind that kind of performance, these superhuman feats almost? The first thing is that athletes like Eliud Kipchoge and Bridget Kosgei are able to consume copious amounts of oxygen. So they're able to take oxygen from the ambient environment into their lungs, get it into the bloodstream, and then deliver copious amounts of that to the working muscles where it's needed. Now, the way that we'll assess that as physiologists generally is through a VO2 max test to get a VO2 max score. And some of you, again, might well have had your VO2 max measured, and some wear it like a badge of honor. To give you some context, a typical VO2 max is about 45 milliliters per kilogram per minute. So 45 milliliters of oxygen consumed per kilogram of body mass that you weigh per minute that you're exercising. Those at the real sharp end, at the elite end, will have VO2 maxes in the region of about 80 to 85 milliliters per kilogram per minute. Sometimes slightly lower, but up there and about. Now, one of the physiological reasons that athletes have such high VO2 maxes is that they are able to deliver copious amounts of blood from the heart per a given amount of time. So somebody who maybe isn't quite so fit might be able to deliver around about 20 liters of blood around the body in a minute, whereas somebody who's got a really high VO2 max might be able to deliver about 40 liters or up towards 40 liters, which is about, the second prop, which is about 80 cupfuls of this jug here. So it's an incredible amount of blood that they're able to deliver around the body. So first thing is that they can consume a lot of oxygen, and that's good because when we use metabolic pathways that involve oxygen, we can generally sustain that energy production for a prolonged period of time. Whereas if you're using anaerobic metabolic pathways, so metabolic pathways that don't involve oxygen, we're generally only able to exercise for a finite period of time with those pathways. The second thing that elite athletes will possess is a high capacity to use a large proportion of their VO2 max. So most people might be able to sustain about 60 or 70% of their VO2 max for a prolonged period of time, whereas elite athletes can tap into around about 80% VO2 max for a prolonged period of time. So their rev limiter, if you like, is set slightly higher. Now that's probably due to factors that exist in the muscle now rather than the delivery of oxygen. So things like fiber type, capillary density, mitochondrial enzyme capacity might dictate that. So there are changes in the muscle that might occur with training there that are beneficial. One of the final physiological factors that explains these performances, and seems to be a really key determinant up at the elite end, is running economy or efficiency. And what that means is that whilst these athletes can consume a lot of oxygen, they don't need as much oxygen to run quickly or to cycle quickly, for that matter. And there was a really nice case study of an elite world cross-country world champion who exhibited a running economy of 150 milliliters per kilogram per kilometer. That was how much oxygen they needed to run a kilometer. Whereas elite Caucasian athletes in the same study, and these were elite runners, needed 210 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram per kilometer. So they needed a lot more oxygen to be able to run that given distance. Now that's really beneficial because not requiring a lot of oxygen means that we won't burn through our body's fuels as quickly, and our body temperature, as I mentioned before, will not rise as quickly as well. So these athletes are very economical and very efficient with their movements. And that's in part going to be explained by certain anthropometric characteristics, so body composition, limb dimensions, and lengths. The final thing then that I wanted to kind of discuss in relation to the physiology is, can anyone break the world record for a marathon? Can anybody do it? And the answer to that, unfortunately, is probably not. Or almost certainly not, even though we know the physiology that underpins maybe successful marathon performance, because it requires a pretty specific blend of genetics, environmental factors, and training to be able to perform in such a way. So if we think of genetics in the first instance, to borrow somebody else's phrase, you do need to choose your parents wisely with regards to athletic performance. There was a study that in 2008 that had identified that there were 23 genes that coded for endurance performance. So these polymorphisms that were likely to mean you'd be more successful in endurance events. And these authors or these researchers calculated the probability that any one person would possess all 23 endurance genes. And their calculations told them that the chances of one person having all of these genes was one in a quadrillion. So that's 1 in 15 zeros, which is just an unfathomably large number. And again, to go back to our jar of sugar, I very loosely estimated that in this jar there are 792,000 grains. There's probably quite a wide margin for error there, but 792,000 grains. If these were people, then in order to find one person with all 23 genes for successful endurance performance, I would need 126 million of these jars for that one person to exist if these represented people. So you've got to win the genetic lottery in the first instance. Secondly, you've got to, or being in the right environment is going to be a big help. Okay, so in all likelihood, amongst other things, if you are born and raised at a certain altitude, perhaps, or certain parts of the globe near the equator, and from a people that have lived there for a long time, chances are that's going to help your endurance performance and your economy. And you've got to train. So in a lot of the cases, or the majority of the cases, many of these athletes have trained from a very young age and done a high training volume. And if you're interested in the amount of training that someone like Eliud Kipchoge might do before a marathon, they're often running per week around about 180 kilometers with a bit of variation either way. So they're covering great distances when they're training at high intensities in a lot of cases. Now, Eliud Kipchoge's training diary is actually available online, and I'd encourage you to go and have a look at that because it's full of days where he's doing so-called easy 10 kilometers in the afternoon after having done quite a few kilometers in the morning. And these easy runs are around about 39 minutes, which is incredible speed. So unfortunately, no, not anybody can be a marathon world record holder, but at least we understand some of the physiology behind it. Okay, that's the end of my talk. Hopefully it came through okay in the end. I am open to any questions if we get any, and I'll do my best to answer them. Great question there. So we've got, will women ever run a faster marathon than men? So to answer that question, it's very difficult to know because the women's world record is progressing at quite a rapid rate. And there is some line of thinking that that world record will continue to progress much quicker, and that we might end up seeing roughly equivalent performances. Generally, the performance differences that we see are down to a multitude of factors. So from a physiological point of view, we certainly see or will see lower VO2 maxes and in some cases poorer economy in females, and that's largely associated with body composition, which is in turn affected by the different hormone responses in males and females. But of course, there's a whole range of sociological and psychological factors that come into play here that other people that may are better qualified to talk about that might have affected the progression of the female marathon. So it seems, based on physiology alone, that would be unlikely, but who knows? So that doesn't really answer the question, sitting on the fence a little bit there. Somebody else has asked, do you think the 2-hour marathon will get broken? Yes, I think it will. I think it's probably going to happen quicker than we thought it might. There was a paper came out around about a decade or so ago where we were looking at maybe it occurring in the next 50 years or so. the fact that Eliud Kipchoge did it in this race in Vienna, or it wasn't a race, this staged event in Vienna, says that it's potentially there. One of the big things that will help with that, though, is the fact that athletes are wearing shoes that provide a very large performance benefit, so up to around about 4%, 3 to 4%. So that might be that might well be what tips people under the, or pushes people under the 2-hour threshold. Somebody else has asked, is there any significance with training over a lifetime? Elite athletes, elite marathons coming from a track and short distance background, is it likely you could be the best for training only 42 kilometers? It's a great question. There are some high profile examples of people coming to marathon running relatively late in their lifetimes and going on to be exceptional marathon runners. The physiological makeup of, say, middle distance, short distance runners is slightly different to those that do longer distances. So actually some of the highest VO2 max are in short, middle distance athletes, because that's the intensity that they run at. So their exercise is about 4 to 8 minutes long. So it's likely that you'll probably be better suited physiologically and genetically to a certain type, longer or shorter. And you see some people maybe try and up the distance and go onto a marathon, and they're not as successful as they were when they were doing a 10 kilometer, or they were competitive 10,000 meter athletes. So again, it's a difficult one to answer. I think those that there is often a progression of people going from the shorter to the longer distances, but the chances are that underneath all of that, there is a physiological kind of predisposition to ultimately be better at that longer distance. And it might be the training for those high intensity events kind of helps raise the VO2 max and other physiological factors, and then that can then permit them going on to run over longer distances. Okay. Any other questions? What training advice would you give to a non-elite athlete attempting their first marathon? Okay, well, the first thing is just acknowledge how difficult a marathon is to do, and set your goals accordingly. Have a plan, but there are a load of plans available online, and give yourself a good amount of training time, to get that training in. Don't make the mistake of thinking you can do 2-3 weeks of training. You look at many months maybe of training to be able to do as well as you might want to do. Do try and build up that training. So try and build in plenty of distance that you're covering, but do it slowly. And generally people will kind of develop injuries if they try and do too much too soon. So think, right, I'm just going to go out and try and run a marathon. Build up to that. Give yourself plenty of recovery in between sessions. So give yourself days off. That's when the training adaptation is going to occur, and get your nutrition right as well. So make sure you're having your sufficient calories, protein, carbs to support the training that you're doing. Now, up at the elite end, we find that the elite people who are training generally do most of their training in low intensity zones. So don't be afraid to go out and do long, slow runs. Don't think everything's got to be at your proposed marathon pace. It doesn't have to be at all. In some cases, around about 80 to 85% of elite athletes' training volume is what in a domain they would call easy. Ostensibly, they'd be able to kind of hold a conversation and hold that pace all day. If they wanted to, they'd just get bored or mentally fatigued. So training sessions where you're doing long, slow distance, and then maybe start to try and build in some intensity work. So start to get some high intensity interval type training in, maybe once or twice per week, where you're working on the upper end of your physiological capacity, and get a good mix there. And there's no golden ticket here. I would say they sound a bit cliche, but listen to your body. Like I say, when you need that recovery or when you can go for a hard session. So Andy Jones, Paula Radcliffe's physiologist, would basically say that she often decided how hard she would train. Okay, so the physiologically with regards to VO2 max, I think it's pretty clear that it's oxygen delivery that is the key determinant there. Okay, and any link in the chain that takes oxygen from the air to the muscle is going to limit performance, and that's why things like maybe altitude and EPO will change VO2 max. But in normal conditions, so normoxia, not altitude hypoxia, in somebody who hasn't got some kind of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, it's going to be delivery of oxygen from the heart that's going to limit VO2 max. But I actually think in again, at the sharp end, you'll find generally that most endurance marathoners have a really similar VO2 max, and some might even be a bit lower than others, but outperform them. So it seems like it's economy or efficiency then that will separate the best from the very best. Like I said before, there's some high-profile examples of Tadesse, for example, having just a remarkable economy. So that seems to be one of the key factors. Okay. Got a minute maybe or so for any other questions, and if not, we'll leave it we'll leave it there. Sorry. Okay, that seems to be everything. Thank you so much for your great questions. Of course, if you've got any more questions or want some more specific answers, please do email me, contact me, drop a message on here, and I'll do my very best to get back to you. Okay, thanks everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in.